Welcome back to another episode of The Road Chose Me. My name's Dan Grech, and today I'm going to get into the weeds a little bit and I'm going to discuss the differences between what I consider overlanding and what I've seen is van life. Lots of people are asking, how do they differ? Isn't overlanding just car camping? Isn't van life just living in your car and going places, which is overlanding? Like, aren't they the same thing? If you've wondered what the distinction is and which one are you interested in doing, stick around, I'll get into all the details right now. So to start off with, I think a lot of people assume that the vehicle you drive really is what determines whether you're a van lifer or whether you're an overlander. And I want to get that out of the way right now and say, I don't think that makes much sense. I've met people driving all over the world in vans, and I've met people who kind of just stay close to home or even stay in one spot who have really decked out four-wheel drive vehicles. So I don't think it's the vehicle that distinguishes or determines whether you're an overlander or a van lifer. I think fundamentally it comes down to what you actually do and how you spend your time. And this is going to be controversial because this really depends on how do you define overlanding and how do you define van lifing. And that is sort of what the difference is. And I've talked about this before. I really like how Scott Brady defines overlanding. And he says that it's vehicle-based adventure travel. And I've said it before, I think the vehicle-based, that's kind of just a qualifier. So yeah, we're doing something in a vehicle, which we could kind of say van lifing is as well. So let's forget about that for a minute. Focus on the meat of it. It's adventure travel. At its heart, that's what we're doing as overlanders. We're going out and we're having adventures and we're traveling. Traveling to me implies going places, whether it's, roaming your own state, roaming up to Alaska, or even venturing all the way down to Argentina. You're traveling, you're having all of these new experiences. So that, I think, is the core of overlanding in my mind. Whereas when I think of van lifers, I'm in a few Facebook groups, I read some online forums, I've even been at events where there's lots of van lifers. I think van lifers are more about we are determined to live in our vehicle and live a life. And that's kind of the core of it. And so lots of van lifers, they actually hold down full-time jobs, whether they're in the tech world in San Francisco, or they live full-time in Vancouver because housing is so outrageously expensive, they choose to live in their van. And these are people maybe who work for the big tech companies, or they're lawyers, or they're accountants. So these people have 40-hour-a-week regular jobs, and they choose to live in their vehicle full-time. So in some ways, that type of van lifing, it's a little bit like the tiny house movement, where people are opting to live in very small homes just because that's affordable or it's better for the environment or whatever their reasons are. Same with van lifing. It's about living full-time in a vehicle. And full-time usually does mean 7 days a week. That is your home. It is everything that you need. And then another sort of variation on that, I think, is people who say, let's go rock climbing in Utah for 5 months and we'll live out of a van while we do it. So you get to Utah, you stay in one place, and your van is like your home or your base camp while you're there. So again, it's kind of more about like permanently living in a van or a vehicle instead of saying, well, I actually live in a proper brick and mortar house and I just get out on the weekends in my four-wheel drive. That's four-wheel driving. Overlanding is I'm going on an adventure travel trip somewhere with my vehicle. And then van lifing is I'm going to live full-time in a van. And lots of van lifers I don't think are so much actually going somewhere. They more focus on their living in their vehicle. And I think this has a few really interesting flow-on effects. One of the big ones that prompted this video, someone asked me, hey, I'm a van lifer, how do you keep yourself entertained? How do you stay busy? I find, especially in the evenings, living in my van, I get a little bit bored. And that really slapped me in the face because when I'm overlanding, the last thing in the entire world that I can think of is being bored. And that is because adventure travel is the heart of what I'm doing. So I'm learning new languages, I'm trying street food, I'm meeting new interesting people, I'm going to rivers, lakes, mountains, I'm poking lava with a stick, I'm paddling with icebergs. All of those are happening every day. On top of that, I'm applying for visas, I'm dealing with immunizations, I'm dealing with military roadblocks and customs, and all of these kinds of logistics are also happening virtually every day. So in fact, my problem isn't that I get bored and I don't have anything to do. Mine is actually the opposite problem. Often I am so busy and there's so many travel experiences coming in every single day, I get to the point where I say, I need a break from this. So when I drove down, I got to Ecuador and I said, I'm just gonna stay put for 5 months because I need to stop having all these new experiences and I need to process the ones I've already had. Same thing happened when I was in Africa. About halfway around, I was in Mozambique and I was just overwhelmed with all these new experiences that I'd been having for a year and a half, but that I hadn't yet really processed or digested. So I said, you know what? I'm just gonna stay put for a whole month. I'm not gonna drive at all. I'm not really gonna have new experiences. I actually just went surfing every day, and that helped me sort of process everything that had built up inside of me so that when I hit the road again a month later, I was fresh and I was ready to go and I could deal with all of those things I just said earlier. So getting bored, I think, is a big distinction. You know, overlanding, I can't really imagine how it could possibly happen, especially if you're driving up to Alaska. You're gonna see the most beautiful places on Earth. You're gonna meet tons of crazy characters, see more wildlife than you can possibly take photos of. All of these things are super exciting and keep you interested every day. Versus if you live full time in a Sprinter van and you're kind of just like sleeping in some concrete parking lot behind some building in Vancouver, you know, it starts drizzling rain and you're just sitting in your van in the evening, yeah, I can kind of see how that might be a bit boring. I kind of understand that living in a very small cramped house, and it is your full-time house. You can't escape it. You can't say, I'm a little bit tired of this. I'm just gonna go hang out in my 2,000 square foot apartment. No, that's not how it works, because van lifing, you're in the van full time. So I think that's one really big difference between the two of them. Van lifing, it is your regular life, and I think it can be a bit boring in such a small space. Versus overlanding, you're just adventure traveling. It's super exciting and super interesting. Another distinction between the two of them, I think even as global overlanders, lots of people take a break. I mentioned that I stopped in Ecuador for 5 months and I didn't sleep in my vehicle. I didn't sleep in my ground tent. I actually slept inside a building for 5 months. So I didn't cook on my camp stove. I totally just like stopped overlanding essentially and took a break and then resumed again. So that's something that overlanders do. It's really common for people to leave their vehicles around the world, fly home to see friends and family or whatever, go home for Christmas because they want to, and then they fly back in again and resume their trip. Whereas, as I was saying earlier, van lifers, it is their full-time life. They live in that van. So you don't meet too many van lifers who are like, oh yeah, once every 6 months or so, we just, go and move back into our house. Because van lifers usually don't have a house, they think of their van as their house. So I think in that way, van lifing, it's a lot more intimidating because it's a lot more committing and it's kind of permanent, or at least, a big continuous block of permanent. Versus overlanding, for many people, it's something you can kind of turn on and off. And even if you were going to roam up to Alaska, it's probably just for 3, 4, 5 months, then you come back again and then resume whatever life you had before your Alaska trip. So overlanding, I feel like people turn on and off quite regularly. Van lifing is kind of more of a permanent life choice. A little bit maybe like being a vegan or something like that, where you say, I'm not just going to be a vegan during the week and then go to McDonald's on the weekend. I'm really committed to this and I'm going to stick it through for years and years, maybe forever. So van lifers in that regard, I think they're a lot more committed and they're really focused on their goal of making their van their home. A flow-on effect of that, I think when your van is your home, van lifers, they really do focus on the creature comforts. So you meet a lot of people who they line the inside of their van with hardwood, they have a really nice sink with running water. They really turn their van, it literally is their home. So it is very, very comfortable, which is great. In some ways, I'm envious of that. Again, I think overlanders, because we're sort of on this adventure trip and it isn't necessarily our permanent life, we're willing to rough it a bit more. Lots of overlanders are under canvas or in tents. Not too many of us have running water. You know, our vehicles aren't necessarily our home forever. It's more just like an adventure vehicle to take us where we want to go and take us home again. So in that regard, we can learn, as overlanders, we can learn a lot from van lifers in how they set up their vehicles. And yeah, I think their vehicles maybe sometimes are a bit heavy because they do things like line them with hardwood, but they also make really good use of space. They invent really good cabinet systems, really good storage in all the voids of the vehicle. All of these kinds of things, van lifers, they optimize it over and over and over again until it's perfect because they live with it every day of their lives. We as overlanders, you just kind of shove stuff in the back and make it work for however long your trip is. So that's where van lifing, I think, is really at the forefront of vehicle design and vehicle comfort because they need it to be so good. Van lifers too, I feel they're not as excited to get super remote or super wild. Lots of them have full-time jobs, as I said, so they need to work from an office or they need at least to have internet. So I think you'll find lots of van lifers, their vehicle doesn't need to get as remote. So they're not really interested in mud terrain tires or diff locks, even a winch. Not so many van lifers bother with all the four-wheel drive accessories. They spend their time on the vehicle creature comforts, making their vehicle into a home. Whereas overlanders typically, not all of us, but many overlanders, we're aiming to get more remote and more wild. Usually for most of us, it's about getting away from work. It's about getting away from the internet. So we want to get remote. Many overlanders focus on how capable is the vehicle, how remote can it take me. So I think there's quite a difference there too in the base vehicles that we select, and then therefore the types of life and the types of activities that those vehicles are going to enable. And then finally, another really big difference that I've noticed is I feel like van lifers have a really strong community, especially now in the US. There's all these new apps popping up, the VanLife app, for example, that are all about meeting and having a good time with other van lifers. And again, I think it's because they're not going to new countries necessarily, learning new languages, trying street food, they may be a little bit looking for entertainment and looking for community. So van lifers tend to group up and hang out together, and that's how they get their social interaction, which is really great. And I feel like as overlanders, we should try and learn from that. Whereas I think overlanders are a little bit more like, I'm solo, rugged adventurer, I'm gonna strike into the unknown by myself or just with one trusted group of friends. And we don't need other people. We don't need the resources that they can provide because we brought all our own self-sufficiency with us. So I think that's a really big social difference between overlanders and van lifers. And again, it's getting blurry now. Overlanders are getting a lot more social, and certainly there are van lifers who are rugged individualists and head out into the wild. But generally speaking, I feel like that's a difference between our communities, and we can definitely learn from each other there. So you can see there's a lot of similarities between van lifing and overlanding, but there's also a lot of differences too. And I don't think those differences by any means need to divide us. And it's not about one being better than the other. They're just different. They're different activities with different goals, with different outcomes. And I think many people will sort of meander between them at different times in their life. Van lifing could be really amazing. Live in your van, hold down a job, earn a decent salary for a couple of years. Once you've squirreled away some money, then you can legitimately hit the road, drive down through Central America, leave your job behind and sort of transition from full-time van life into now I'm an overlander and I'm interested in all of those kinds of differences. So I think it's really great. You can meander from one to the other and back again and learn all the pros and cons and have all the experiences for yourself. So I'd be really interested to hear what you think is the difference between overlanding and van lifing. So please leave a comment down below and let me know, did I say things that resonated with you and that you think make sense? Or do you disagree with me and do you have a different view of overlanding or van lifing, or maybe even both? Let me know. I love to discuss this kinds of thing and think about all the different pros and cons and what you get out of one versus what you get out of the other. So leave a comment down below. While you're there, hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel. New videos come out every Monday and Thursday designed to help you get out on the road. Speaking of getting on the road, I've booked my tickets. It's less than 6 weeks until I fly out to a whole new continent, a whole new adventure awaits. That's all coming really soon. And my supporters on Patreon are getting exclusive behind the scenes access to all the details. Details on where I'm going, why, the vehicle I'm building, and the whys of all the modifications I'm making to the vehicle. So I have no interest in just saying to people, oh, I'm getting a rooftop tent, and then moving on. I'm gonna go through why did I decide on a rooftop tent, which I didn't actually, but all of the whys of each and every modification, and each and every one of them has to be a genuine upgrade and a genuine improvement. None of them are about looks. None of them are just because that's what you do as an overlander. And all of them have to be very budget conscious as well. I'm on a really tight budget and I want to make this expedition happen, even though I don't have enough money just to throw a whole catalog worth of parts at a vehicle. So all the whys, all the reasoning is what I'm really going into. And that's all over on Patreon right now. So there's a link in the description of this video. From just $5 a month, you can support me and you'll get access to all that behind the scenes content. As well as you can ask me anything you want to know about my previous trips, my upcoming trip, vehicles, your own trip. All of that is on Patreon. So head over there and check that out. So once again, thanks very much for watching. Stay safe out there and maybe I'll bump into you on the road.